All right. Welcome, everyone, to week 7 of our xAPI cohort. And today we're going to be getting the most from your learning analytics data. So, we're going to see how we take everything and put it together. So, if you would like to further your xAPI learning, we have something for you at DevLearn, the xAPI Accelerator Certificate Program. It's happening on October 23rd in Vegas. So make sure, and the 24th, I should say. And so here we go with the link right there for the xAPI Accelerator. And then we have our certificate program that I just put in there for DevLearn. And then we have our xAPI party. So we're going to showcase all this wonderful work you've been doing in cohort. It's going to be December 1st, 8 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. to 2 p.m. Pacific. So it's a pretty long thing there that we're going to have for the xAPI party. We're going to have you sign up, and I'm going to post that over here in our chat. We're going to have you sign up for it. Sign up is free, so you can come and see all the wonderful work that people have been doing in cohort. And of course, if you do want to be one of those people to showcase what you've been doing during cohort, make sure you go ahead and submit your proposal. Submit your work by November 4th to share it with all the community on December 1st. We're really, really looking forward to this. And of course, we have our little gnome here, and Megan's going to reveal his name. I don't know his name, Megan.
His name's Vikey.
But of course,
Vikey the gnome. Yes,
Vikey the gnome. So make sure that you do that. And then, of course, for those of you who are in the cohort but may not necessarily be guild members, please try and get over to our website. I'm going to put that link in here in just a minute. And go ahead and join the guild, because the guild is free in terms of membership. When you become a member, you have all kinds of discounts to the face-to-face conferences, and we offer online conferences. We have all kinds of materials for you. So I'm going to drop that link into chat. And with that, I'm going to just introduce our speaker today. I think some of you already know Megan Torrance, the CEO of Torrance Learning. Get the most from your learning analytics data. Megan's going to show us how to use all that wonderful work that we're doing and get the most out of it. So Megan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Karen, for that. I'm actually going to pitch one more xAPI event. This is like a whole snowball. There's the 2-day accelerator program that runs Sunday and Monday right before DevLearn. And then on Tuesday before DevLearn is the xAPI user conference. And so the accelerator is hands-on with Jeff Batt. That'll be like expect colons and brackets. You're going to be in and doing it, which is really exciting. xAPI user conference is going to be a little bit more talking about it with people who are doing it, as well as some new folks are welcome. But there's also going to be the xAPI Hyperdrive contest there. So that's an opportunity to it's a competition. Show off your work, do a thing. That's a load of fun and adds some drama. It'll be a good time. I'm actually really looking forward. I've been looking at the program for the user conference. So I hope to see you there. I won't be at the accelerator. You will be in good hands with Jeff Batt. I will be at the user conference. And Matt Cleaver will also be at the user conference. So we will plan on seeing you there. So that's pretty awesome. Question came in, is the xAPI party on location? The xAPI party will be virtual. So the xAPI user conference is on location, but it's DevLearn's location, which is where more people are, and the party will be virtual. You know, the restaurant, David, the restaurant that was giving us, or not giving, where we were getting all of the really great French fries, the herb fries for the xAPI party, when they went out of business, it's just not the same. It's just not the same. So bring your own fries and join us online for xAPI party. will say it allows us to get examples and sessions and stuff from all over the world. And if you have issues getting your poutine over the border to the States, you can have it at home. So it's good to be back at cohort. Hello, everybody. Those of you who don't, I know a few of you, I've been chatting in the chat with you. Those of you who I don't know, my team and I founded the xAPI Learning Cohort. We love that it's in such really great hands with the Learning Guild right now, but it's great to come back. And so everyone, I am well stocked up with iced coffee today, and let's get started. I mean, the question really here is, what do I do with all of this data, right? And that's really the question that we are that we're going to talk about today. What do I do with all this data once I've got it, right? Let me just hit that hide button. And that's me. We've talked about that. Here's a thing. Here's a thing that I tell instructional designers, right? As an industry, we kind of have a data problem, right? Or a lack of data problem, right? If you think about this, and I love SCORM, don't get me wrong. Most of us have our jobs today because of SCORM and the industry around which it has been or that's been built up around it, right? The ability of SCORM for providing a rich and interoperable marketplace is incredible, right? It allows you to switch e-learning authoring tools and not have to do anything different with your LMS, right? It allows you to switch LMSs and not have to switch your e-learning authoring tools. It allows you to switch vendors or to bring it in-house or to put it out to a vendor and not have to switch. And as long as everybody's talking SCORM, it makes sense, right? It works. And that's been really powerful. It also means we've been able to build, as an industry, geek-free tools so that the average instructional designer can make e-learning that fits anywhere and doesn't have to touch a single colon or a single bracket of code. It's pretty awesome. But in order to work that way in the time in which it was designed, it's pretty shallow. So we just don't have a lot of data, which means for the last 2 decades, instructional designers have been, we make jokes about, well, how do we measure training, right? Well, we can measure completions, we can measure hours, we can measure test scores, and then the old joke is, we can weigh them before and after training and see if they're heavier or lighter, right? We just don't have good data. So when somebody asks us about the value of training, we don't have a lot of data to talk about it. So we've kind of built this chicken and an egg thing, or this downward spiral, because then when given data, sometimes we don't know what to do with it because we're not used to dealing with data. So we end up with this kind of strange situation. And I am often reminded that marketing and advertising were once a dark art. 30 years ago, when I was in university, I was a public relations and advertising major for a few months. Okay? And advertising 101, we were looking at airbrushed photos of ice in scotch and trying to find the subliminal messages in there. I'm not kidding. You didn't ask how it worked. You were to trust them that it worked because there's no data. And there is a ton of data around a lot of aspects of marketing right now, right? The entire industry built up around marketing data, and every click and every interaction is now very, very harnessed to make that a much better process. And so I think we have the ability to learn a little bit about this from what our marketing friends have done, but we get to accelerate that, right? We get to move a little bit faster. On the other end of the spectrum, we have big data, right? Big data is exciting, right? It's the kind of thing that people are like, ooh, big data, that's the fancy job, right? And most of the time in the learning space, we don't have big data. Most of the time in the learning space, right? We're not looking at truly big data, right? But there's a few things that we can learn, just like there's a few things we can learn from the marketing folks. There's a few things we can learn from the big data folks, right? That are relevant for us here, right? So I didn't invent this term, right? I can't remember who did, right? But it's like, well, we don't have big data, but we have enough data, right? And there's a lot that we can borrow. So big data generally comes from multiple data sources, and it's a mixture of structured and unstructured data. So how do I describe structured data? Structured data, you can run it out into a rectangular Excel spreadsheet. SCORM is super structured data. I know exactly what I'm getting out. xAPI is less structured. It's not completely unstructured. It is less structured, right? And when we think about xAPI from a data sources perspective, that's the whole bonus, right? Remember, SCORM only does e-learning courses launched from learning management systems, one at a time while you're connected to the internet, right? It's a pretty limited use case, right? And with xAPI already this semester, we've been talking about, yes, data from e-learning, but also data from video, data from platforms, data from, you all are working, data from H5P, data from podcasts. There were project teams in the past in xAPI cohort who got data from Twine, who got data from Zoom, who got data from Alexa. I could pull up my cohort Slack and look at all the different kinds of things that you all are working on this session, right? From games, right? From VR into AR, from LMSs, right? So there's lots of stuff. In fact, do me a favor, project teams, if you've got a quick update about what your team is working on, go ahead and put that in the chat stream here so that everybody can see the kind of cool things that you're working on and what your status is. And maybe you'll find some folks who will add in, join your team and participate. So there's lots and lots of stuff here, right? Multiple data sources, structured and unstructured. So those are some concepts we can borrow from our big data friends, right? With big data, right? Big data, you can't do it on your laptop with Excel, right? It's just going to bog it down. I'll tell you, my laptop and Excel starts really bogging down after about 12 or 15,000 rows. That's not big, right? Big data, it's math heavy and gets into statistics, and then on the other end, right, we start getting into machine learning and artificial intelligence, right? Stuff that we're just not doing in a SCORM world, right? Big data and enough data, right? Some of our corollaries here are also fine-grained enough to see detail, which I'm not getting today in SCORM. I'm getting kind of brute force metrics, right? It's relational across data sources, which means I can be connecting, for example, you've talked about data governance, and Jason Hagg was on talking about data structures and whatnot, right? And so the concept of data governance, which is how do I make sure that I've got the right data from the right sources, and it's all speaking the same language so it's actually usable. Part of that will be to have a master catalog so that when I take a particular course, I can reference back to the metadata for it, right, and the connection for it, so I can put that into some sort of meaningful structure, right? That's some of the things that a relational approach can take. And it lets me bring in new data sources. I am not limited to only one data source ever, right? I can bring in new data sources. So as I start getting, adding new platforms and tools to my learning ecosystem, I can then be bringing in all sorts of other data into my pool and using that to augment what I'm looking at. So not big data. Oops, I'm scribbling all over my screen. Sorry about that. not big data, but certainly enough data. And when we think about the data, I want you to be thinking about the qualities of it, right? When we're looking at a SCORM world, we're only looking at individual data, but with xAPI, I can be looking at social data, right? Who is talking to whom? What organizations, right, are engaging here? Who is follow? You can add other things there, right? So there's lots of variations and options. SCORM was very predictable. With xAPI, we can be much more variable in what we do. We can add a whole lot of things, which means we can be surprised, or we can dump in a bunch of data we don't know it's there, and then we miss out on that value, right? With SCORM, seriously, I can close my eyes and run a report with SCORM and tell you exactly what data fields are on it. With xAPI, it doesn't work that way anymore. So those of you who are e-learning developers, you can build an e-learning package and drop it off with the LMS administrator and walk away. And the LMS administrator can run a report on that, right? Because they know the only data that's ever going to come out. They don't need you. And when we move into a more analytics-centric and xAPI-centric environment, instructional designers, you cannot just drop off a zip file and walk away. You are engaged all the way through the measurement, which we've been asking to be engaged all the way through measurement for decades. This is exciting, right? So we're looking at data about learning and about performance, summative and formative data. And here's what's really cool, right? So we've been traditionally looking at data about the learners, right? With xAPI, if we have observers or instructors or managers who are rating learners, we can now start getting data about them. And then with sensors and Internet of Things and devices and browsers, we can start also adding in information about the environment. So there's lots of cool stuff. When we start looking at big data or enough data or just lots of data, right? Useful data, right? There's called the V's of data, right? Volume, I've got enough of it. Velocity, I get it fast enough to make a difference, right? Data that's 3 months old is not fast enough, right? I also may not need it real time, but right, it has to have an appropriate velocity. Variety, right? Getting lots of different sources and variability. Value. And I think there was some really interesting conversation in one of the Slack channels about, right, I could collect lots of data, right? I could collect lots of data, but if it's not valuable, or if I analyze it and therefore seem to create some energy around it and it's meaningless, then I'm not actually doing anybody any good. And then veracity, and by this we mean, right, I can believe it. Right? It's good stuff. So what then is analytics? Right? I went out to Investopedia, right? The science of analyzing raw data to make conclusions about that information. That sounds super boring, right? What's exciting about analytics is that this is how we get our questions answered, right? This is how we answer all those questions that people have been asking us, and we haven't had great answers to. And the neat thing is that we know what the questions are. In fact, I often lean on, right, some of the traditional instructional design approaches, right? When I say what questions do we have? I come back to some of our favorite instructional design tools and evaluation tools, frameworks that have been around in our industry for decades, some of them. And there's lots of questions. Okay, so let's talk about what we're talking about here. I like to think about how we use data in terms of a framework. I know we're talking about analytics today, but analytics is not the only game in town when it comes to data, right? So we need to archive our data, which may sound super boring. It's actually not. It's required for all the rest. I have to like get it, collect it, put it in one place and secure it. That is hyper important. So that's all, think all of your access, security, privacy, confidentiality, all of that, one spot, right? But then there's transcripting, credentialing, portability. There's some really interesting things that, particularly as we move toward a more learner data centric environment, there's some really exciting things that'll be happening in that space, right? We then have, right, the need to have, right, a variety of things around analytics. And we're going to look into, right, different kinds of analytics and just some examples as we go. And then we need to be acting on, and when I say acting on data, I'm not meaning we act on the analytics like I learned in my analytics that this was a good decision, so I'm going to make this decision. No, what I'm saying is using data, right, in the workflow and learning flow outside of the analytics, right? But using that, right, to actually change things. So if you took course A and you did X, Y, and you did a particular action in course A, you would get course B. But if you didn't do a particular action in course A, you'd do course C. So what Linda's saying here, right? She's got a Trish Ewell quote. I love Trish, right? Analytics is about taking action to make better. Totally. And that's what we're talking about here, right? What I'm talking about here, right, is we know what the actions are. If this, then that. We can use that to personalize learning, to adapt learning, to incorporate learning in the workflow, to hand off between learning and working throughout the day. So there's lots of stuff, right? When we're diving into that analytics capability, I'm then looking at a number of things. So descriptive analytics is what happened. And I'll tell you at that first blush of what happened, when you all in your projects for cohort this semester send data and you first see data in the learning record store, that's your first bit of descriptive data. It tells you what happened. It's very exciting. I actually just watched a client the other day. We set them up and they sent an xAPI statement in a real time. They saw it in their LRS and she's just like, yes, it's so exciting, right? So that was super fun. But you can make your descriptive data, right, interesting, right? I will tell you the activity stream, it's exciting when you first get it. And after a while, it's just like watching a ticker go by. You'll see things that are interesting, but it's not useful, right? That's where we start adding visualizations. That's where we start thinking about how do we present this in ways that make it meaningful. This though, right, even if you're still in a SCORM world or you're counting things, right, you can still be doing some basic descriptive analytics and when did people do different things? Our diagnostic in analytics are similar to descriptive. They're a little bit different. Right? I take it a little bit of the next layer, right? The question goes from what happened to why did it happen, right? So we had a course that we worked on a number of years ago, and we had some questions around how people were successful in the course, whether people were successful in the course, what did they why? Why? That's your question, right? And so then we get into descriptive, and we can use in some cases many of the same techniques in our descriptive analytics as we do in our diagnostics that we do in our descriptive, but the purpose is different. Right? So here we have an interaction where we ask people to rank which of these options would you take, right? Given X situation, there's 5 different options, each of which is plausible. Rank them, put them in your own order of preference. And then we know, right, we have analytics that tell us, and here's just what they ranked in top order, but correlated with, we can take that and correlate that with how they performed in the course, right? That answers the why question. One of my favorites is we have this thing, we say, what would you what do you feel about the value of the topic of this course, which is about coaching, right? And we ask this question at the beginning of the course, right? What's the value, right? And so they select a bunch of answers. At the end of the course, we bring those same answers back to them and we say, okay, so now what do you think of the value of coaching, right? And we're getting data out there, right? So the blue is what they had clicked, and then the green is what they then discarded later on. That's kind of cool, right? So I can see, like I can go in and I can look like, right? Perhaps this change in the value helps to explain, right, something else in the course. That's pretty cool. Right? That even gets this before we even that was a desired or undesired, right, outcome. It may just explain something in the course, right? And for the sake of the recording, because I don't think that the chat comes through in the recording, Zola has posted the postman bit the dog. That's a descriptive statement. Why and how did it happen? That's your diagnostics, right? Can we predict that this will happen again? That's your predictive. And then how do we stop this from happening again? That's prescriptive, right? And think about prescriptive as not only preventing things, we do want to prevent dogs from biting postmen and women, but we also, right, if I want a certain outcome, how do I get a certain outcome? Right? And so there's a number of different things that we can do with predictive analytics. If you're going to be at DevLearn, stop by JD Dillon. I don't have pictures of any of his stuff, but he's got some very interesting analyses around frontline worker training and their ability to predict who will, which teams will complete training and which teams can expect to have the best results in the workplace because of their training impact. So there's some pretty cool stuff there, right? And then our prescriptive, right? It's how do we make it happen the way we want it to in the future, right? How do we want to make it happen? So what we are looking for, we can create. Ben Betts has some stuff on this in the Learning Analytics Maturity Model. I know Ben spoke week 2 or week 3 of cohort. He didn't talk much about the Learning Analytics Maturity Model. This descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, prescriptive bit is pretty common in the analytics space, but Ben's done some work to bring it into the learning space and apply it there. The math tends to get harder the further you go, okay? And so that's another space where, interestingly, a lot of instructional designers are not the ones who are going to jump up and say, math, let me add it, right? And yet those of you who are closeted math geeks, like, this is your time, because there's a lot of cool stuff that can go on here. And I recommend, if you're looking for if you're interested in this space and you are interested in making a professional development plan for next year, now might be a good time for that, to have that conversation with your leader. I recommend a basic statistics course, right? Or an analytics course, a business analytics. There's nothing magic around. There is something magic about learning analytics, but the courses out there in business analytics offer some really great basics on the statistics you'll need to get involved. So Amy's question in the chat, what's the best authoring tool to get this level of analytics? We currently use Rise 360 and Articulate. Okay, so great question, Amy. And here's why, right? The course is going to send the data to a place, right? The course is going to send the data. And so what you want to make sure is that you've got an authoring tool that will send data that sends the kind of data you want to answer, right? So for example, if you want to answer questions like which values did somebody select, or what text did somebody enter on a screen, or did they click a particular non-standard item in the course, then you're going to want to use one of the more robust authoring tools. Domino, right? Code-free, out of the box. It just sends data on everything you click. It's pretty awesome, right? Storyline and Captivate each have fairly robust out of the box. It's gotten better in the last year. Out of the box support for xAPI, and they each have the ability to use, and Lectora too, out of the box. Thanks for that, David Juno. But you could also use their JavaScript triggers to get custom xAPI out if you want something different. Rise is going to give you very, very basic, very SCORM-like stuff out of it. So if you want to know click level stuff, then you will want to be using Storyline. If you're an Articulate person, but there's other things. Actually, at the Storyline user conference at DevLearn in a couple of weeks, Matt Cleaver has, I think, like a 90-minute session in which he's going to go through the basic xAPI data available from Storyline out of the box, how to use Storyline's built-in xAPI function, and then how to use xAPI, which is a product that Torrance Learning created, that basically helps you craft the JavaScript that you need to be able to get any data you want out of xAPI. So there's all sorts of tools, and the beautiful thing is that the tools are evolving. The bummer thing is that they're evolving more slowly. So sorry for that detour, but it did seem like a really useful one in the moment as we're talking about getting better data. So great question, right? First, you have to have something that sends the data you want. Then you need to have something that helps you store, process, and visualize, although I will tell you, visualizations are not the only game in town when it comes to analytics, right? And those tools will be your learning record stores, or you can then pass that data down to business analysis tools like Power BI, Tableau, and whatnot. Regardless of what tool you're going to use, there's a process for doing this, right? You're going to start by making a plan. You need to identify who your stakeholders are. You need to connect with the organization and their business needs. You've got to figure out what are your data types and sources. And I'm going to share with you some examples here. And out of that, then we define questions. So remember that data and analytics is around answering the questions that you have about your learning programs, right? And so spending some time on creating those questions and hypotheses nice. I'm going to sip a coffee because I clearly need some more hypotheses. Will really, really help you. And here's the thing, as we look at, right, as we look at defining our questions and working with, in some cases, we'll have the opportunity, if you work for a larger organization, to work with your data team. Okay? As a learning and development professional, you have something to offer that conversation. Don't get intimidated by the fact that they walk in with all sorts of fancy statistical terms and tough tools and all of that, and things that are that you feel like, whew, that's over my pay grade and it's got a lot of numbers. Don't worry about that. You offer a lot of value in that conversation because you know, right, your data. And learning data has lots of quirks in it. Quirks that we don't even recognize as learning professionals. We've dealt with these so long that we don't recognize those as quirks, right? And so that's really important for you to be involved. But the more detailed you can make your specific questions and hypotheses, right? Because you're going to go one at a time, right? The better data you will get out of that. And do not underestimate the amount of time that takes. You'll then instrument your learning experience for data capture. And that's what the question we were just talking about. The question is, what's the best authoring tool for this, right? How do you instrument your authoring, okay, tools in order to get the data you need in the formats that you need? Right? And then you'll need to store, clean, and secure that data. So Sean Putnam from Learning Ninjas where's my book, Investigating Performance? Used to be back here. It's gone. I must have loaned it to somebody. And Janet Lana Efron wrote a book called Investigating Performance. It's a fantastic book to get started with analytics. And I think they were the ones who coined the term the data supply chain. Love this. So storing, cleaning, and getting that data secured is really important. Right? We then look at, right, analyzing that data, which involves, in my experience, iterating both on the learning design and your analyses, because I think Amy Parent covered it early on in the session, right? Often the first data that you get, right, and the first questions that you answer, you've got to answer the questions that your senior leaders ask you, right, before they even have any time or mental space to get to the interesting questions that you might have. But I'll also say, I have very often, and Matt Cleaver's online here and will attest to this, right? We have a bunch of questions, we go out and we get the data and we get the answer and we're like, oh, well, now what I really want to know is something else, right? So I'm just going to plant that seed that when you get started in analysis, right, it's an iterative process. It's an iterative process with your stakeholders. It's an iterative process with your designers. I remember very clearly one afternoon, Matt and I were working on a project and we were all excited that we got data and we're looking at this fancy schmancy spider chart analysis of the data. And we're like, wow, look at that. It's super cool. And then I looked at it a little closer and realized it was absolutely meaningless because we weren't sending it the right data, but we didn't really know that until we got there and saw it. So we iterated, right? So plan for that too, right? And then, right, then we get to that visualization and communicating it visually, connecting with stakeholders, telling your story, bring your storytelling, right, into that space, because that's some of the power that you offer there, right? So that's my five easy steps, right? Making a plan gets really, really deep, right? Why do we want to data? What questions are we trying to solve? Where's it coming from? What systems and processes have this data? And where are we going to use it, right? How are we going to organize it? How are we going to get it to the right place? There's lots and lots of questions that this plan up front will spark you to answer. Then we get into what questions are we actually going to analyze, right? There's often a variety of ways to do this, right? So we look at, right, what does the organization want? What do we as a learning team need, right? But what are our business sponsors? What do they want? I then find those evaluation frameworks really, really helpful because I get more questions, right? That then helps me narrow down, right, my list of questions. I look at where is the data to answer those and what am I going to start with? So let me give you, this is a real world example. This is a screenshot, right, of a process for a real world project, right? We started by identifying a bunch of questions. The question here is, right, what questions do we have that we might be able to answer with data? What's really interesting is there's some overlap, but there's also some questions that, right, there's a whole bunch of questions that the learning team cares about that nobody else cares about, right? It's like, oh, well, that's good to know, right? There's a lot of questions that both the learning team and the business team and the learner care about. Well, that's good to know too. Am I special? Yeah, right? So, I mean, that's a question, right? Am I, right? The learner might want to know, am I outstanding? Learners like to be told that they're outstanding, right? But you know, there's lots of questions that we might have. This is a brainstorming process. And then we're going to take it one more level, and we're going to say, okay, what do our instructional design frameworks, what are our historical ways about going about this? What do they offer for us? So down here, this is Will Telheimer's learning transfer evaluation model, right? So I have all of those items, and I'm looking at it across outcomes, efficiency, and effectiveness. I generate a whole bunch of new questions. Okay. Now I've got way more questions than I can possibly work with. So I put them all into an Excel spreadsheet. Then I start asking some serious questions, right? Who cares about the answer? Who are my stakeholders, right? What is the data that is required to answer those questions, right? What is the data that's required to answer those questions? And where is that data? That then helps me prioritize. Further down in this spreadsheet, there were some questions that the learning team was really interested in, but the data was in multiple sources. And they felt like for their first project, they wouldn't be able to join data from multiple sources. They were just going to be happy to get data out of any one source. They happen to control their learning management system. So this is a source of data, right? This particular one, right, might be a good place to start because some of the data is in a system they actually control. Some of the data isn't, right? So they're able to start making decisions around where are we going to start analysis? And as we do that, right, how do I build a strategy, right, for getting enough credibility in the organization to do more analysis and get my hands on more data? And that's what this team was all about, right? Because this framework for using data, right, requires this foundation underneath, excuse me, where we're looking at strategy, skills on the L&D team, systems and data supply, statistics and data science, and relationships, right? The relationships that you'll need in order to make this work. You probably can't go it alone in most organizations of any size. Jessica's question back on number 2, what was the name of the framework? Oh, can somebody, it's Will Telheimer's, thank you, Learning Transfer Evaluation Model. And so when we look at organizations adopting xAPI and analytics, we see a series of like phases, right? A roadmap, if you will, about how they move forward over time from prototypes. That's where you are here at cohort. Most of you are making prototype projects, right? And you're doing it here because most people in your organizations don't yet know what xAPI is. Okay? When you then start moving to actual pilot projects within your organizations or your first production pilot or production projects, then, right, you're actually building on your strategy to build credibility, to get buy-in, to start identifying the needs for standards and data governance. You are getting tools, right? And building infrastructure that will let you move over to a more full organization, enterprise-wide implementation. And I'm happy to share. There's a lot more detail behind this phased roadmap approach. I'm happy to share with you more about it. And actually, I've got information, more depth on pretty much everything I talked about here today in a book that's coming out in January or February on data and analytics for instructional designers. I'm not sure. I don't think I'm allowed to show the book cover yet, but there's the last copy edit version of it on my desktop. And so it's a real thing and it's coming out. I would love to catch up with you more and chat about this. So I'm going to be at DevLearn. I will not be in the xAPI Accelerator. I will be there at the user conference. I'll be at the expo and a whole bunch of other things. I hope it wasn't too self-promotional. I actually have a lot of things I'd like to share with folks. I'll be at Learning 2022, and you can find me in the cohort Slack or via email. So I want to thank all of you for joining me today. And I want to thank Karen for supporting, because there's nothing like working with a fantastic moderator and producer. And I can hang out for a few minutes at tables if folks have questions. It was good to see everybody. Oh, Karen, you're on mute. I kind of feel better that I'm not the only one who does that.
Right, I am. So, but hopefully my face was expressive, because I was just sharing how much I appreciated Megan's high energy for this presentation. We always enjoy. So when we end this session, we want to thank Megan for that great presentation. And then, of course, all the wonderful xAPI things. And go ahead on the Guild site. You'll be able to see them. And, of course, DevLearn and our xAPI party on December 1st. So when I close this session, we have some tables that you will be directed to. Feel free to go ahead and network. I'm going to sit at one that says xAPI at DevLearn. If you have any questions there, I can answer. So we're going to be saying goodbye to everybody, and we'll see you at the next session next week. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.